All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. So welcome to our fourth panel here on challenges and opportunities to increasing the use of Earth observation in impact evaluations. My thinking behind this panel was to try to bring together a group of people who might talk to each other and work together in this spirit, but who might come from some different backgrounds and different organizational types to try to see what the kind of diversity of views might teach us about these opportunities and challenges. So I'm really happy and honored to have a great group to talk to today. So Tulika Narayan is the climate change practice lead at Mathematica. Rocio Carrero is the customer service manager for education and research at Planet. Arif Rashid is the division chief for design, monitoring, evaluation, and applied learning in the Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance at USAID. And Hannah Camp is the senior advisor at Mercy Corps' monitoring, evaluation, and learning team. So a really cool and esteemed group of folks. All right, well, let's get right into it then. First question. So leveraging Earth observation for impact evaluation is still, I would say, quite new. As you've seen, there's a lot of work going into this, but this is very much a nascent field. So how much awareness do you think there is of Earth observation for impact evaluation in your communities? And what do you think might be the best ways to kind of build this awareness? Tulika, maybe I'll ask you to go first, and then Arif, Rocio, and Hannah, sorry.
Thanks for the question, Ariel, and thanks also for inviting me, and thanks to the community in GeoField, bringing together community, so to speak. And that's probably the first answer. This was a great meeting today to share ideas, and I think this community of practice may have a lot to contribute in how to bring this awareness together. So I would say that, you know, in the space that I occupy, where we are providing evaluation services and trying to bring as rigorous and flexible approaches to our clients, and you saw the kind of approach that Anthony presented, where you're trying to use Earth observations to make an evaluation more rigorous than before. So there is a fair degree of awareness, but I would call that and say that awareness is not binary in that space, in this space. The use of Earth observation is probably pretty old in agriculture evaluations when you're just talking about incorporating weather data, temperature data as explanatory variables. But I think the devil is in the details of the awareness to be really fully understand what outcomes we can measure with what degree of precision and what kind of biases, their own biases that might exist in Earth observation. So I think it'll be really helpful to continue to bring the communities together. It requires deep expertise on the Earth observation science. Evaluators, economists need to keep having these conversations across the board. So I think platforms like this would be very, very valuable to do that.
Thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity to be able to hear all the great presentations and get to know colleagues who are also working in the same space. Art observation, use of art observation in evaluation, any kind of evaluation, is, as you noted, that's new, and the awareness within USAID about the utility of art observation and evaluation is very, very limited. It's also one of the challenge, one of the reasons that awareness is limited, because most of our evaluations don't use Earth observation. We also, even the practitioners, evaluation practitioners in USAID is not, fully aware of the opportunities that we can utilize. What are the scopes? What are the opportunities that we can use Earth observation in evaluations, let alone impact evaluations? One of the, I think the way to build awareness is having more integrating Earth observation. Integrating Earth observation in more evaluations that we do. Also, organizing similar seminar or webinar, bringing more people, probably starting with the practitioners, because I think it is the practitioners are also not very aware. So raising awareness among the evaluation practitioners within USAID, I think will definitely help to integrate our Earth observation data into evaluation, and that eventually will raise awareness. Over.
Thanks, Arif. Rothio?
Hi, yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I am so honored to be here. I agree very much with the other co-panelists, and I think that bringing people together in the room is really important, as well as putting practitioners first. I work in the Earth observation data provider, and we only get half of the picture. And the most important half is the picture on the ground, and putting together the observations from the ground for the field teams and contrasting the goals that you had originally when you started using it, observation for a specific project, and how that has turned around. And then in that contrast, it's when the learning happens, and when you can watch how much remote sensing data is actually helping to the impact evaluation at hand. So I think it's really, really important to connect those 2 points and do it continuously. And also from my side, I think that we are very interested in learning from you and from the field, how can we better provide data in a way that is more helpful.
Thanks. Hannah?
Well, thanks, and echoing the thanks of everyone on the panel for putting this together. I think from my experience, when it comes to sort of the implementing organizations that I work with and I interact with, I don't think there is a lot of awareness. Generally, what I see is people being aware that, you know, Earth observation holds a lot of promise for many different aspects of agricultural programming, and people tend to be pretty familiar with the idea of using satellite imagery for, you know, identifying damage to structures or some other part that might be done in other parts of humanitarian or international development work. But for something like using it for an impact evaluation, I think people may know that it's a possibility, but are very wary of the technical complexity and the potential costs of using it. So people want to do this right, but we know that it will be hard, and organizations like ours usually have very few people, if anyone, who can really talk with us about what's possible and how we get there in really accessible terms. So I think that what can help is certainly these use cases can be helpful in building awareness, and I think the more we can translate that into a really clear articulation of what we will be able to do using that information in terms of our program decision-making or our future design that we can't do otherwise, I think that's going to be really helpful. It needs to be very, very plain language, nuts and bolts. How would we make a different decision than what we're doing? And I think advocacy and support from donors and from other parts of the community would really be helpful as well. Like bringing the message to implementing organizations, I think, can be helpful, since we're usually pressed for time. We're not spending a whole lot of our time going out there and saying, like, well, what are all the cool new things that we could potentially be doing? So that's what I'd say from my side.
Yeah, thanks. Those are really helpful insights. And we'll definitely, I think, come back to this question of, what does it really take to pull this off, and just how complex and challenging it is. But maybe before we get there, let me ask you, I know we've talked and seen a lot of different ways that Earth observation approaches are contributing to agricultural impact evaluations, but what in each of your minds is like the most important, if you had to pick like one top thing that's a challenge right now for agricultural impact evaluations and learning that you think Earth observation could help with or could help address? And maybe let's, just for fun, let's reverse the order. So Hannah, maybe I'll let you go first this time. Randomized trial, right?
Yeah, I think maybe for us, the biggest one being, we're, at least in my mind, we're increasingly seeing already in our data collection for agricultural projects, we tend to have to cover very large areas, and it can be difficult terrain. It's very hard to get the ground data and information. So I think bringing in Earth observation and another challenge, like complementary challenge to that I should mention, is that we're often and increasingly implementing in situations where our physical access to the implementation area might change really quickly for conflict reasons or political reasons or whatever. And so knowing that, how can we use Earth observation to help us certainly like plug in gaps? And we know it's not that simple. We know the ground data is incredibly important. And if for whatever reason we can't collect it, it might be a major problem. But how could bringing Earth observation into the picture, maybe even from the beginning, help us plan for those realities and understand what we need to do when we need to do it? And can we even complement our information gaps there in a situation where our access might have been removed to our areas, to still be able to help understand what happened and what impact were we able to make? Passing over to Rocio.
Thank you. Yes, I would fully agree with Hannah in the extent of accessing remote or conflict-related areas, that's for sure, and also large areas. But I also want to emphasize an aspect that I think can be really important for impact evaluation, and is the fact that with remote sensing data, you can perform large-scale evaluations in a way that is reproducible across different geographic areas. And I think that is a big advantage. You can use same methodologies independent of the country and then compare results. Another interesting advantage is that you can also perform retroanalysis in areas that have poor data from the past, or maybe you have data gaps from ground data, and you can try to compensate for those with retroanalysis with remote sensing, especially as our archive grew. And yes, I think that it can also bring transparency in terms of methodology, which is really important. That's it.
Thank you. Along the same line, I think one of the main challenge that we are facing, and probably we can integrating Earth observation data could give us some light. Yield estimation. Right? We are working with very small scale farmers, and they don't plant the same crop and not even same variety. So it is extremely challenging, to estimate yield. Right now, we are doing an impact evaluation, 2 impact evaluations, in fact, in Zimbabwe, where the socioeconomic part is conducted by IPA, and the geospatial part is conducted by NASA's survey project. So we combine these two, where it's both of these projects have large watershed management component, and we particularly survey is trying to estimate estimate yield using both NDVI and LAI, using DSAT data, with crop modeling, both ground data set from the partner NGO, and then using satellite data. So we don't know, we are trying it together, but that would be a great help if we can find a way to estimate yield other than just depending on farmers' recall data. Over.
Thanks for picking me to go last, Ariel, because I have a long list of challenges for doing agriculture impact evaluations, and there's certainly already people have spoken about addressing some of them. We talked about yield estimation. Arif also covered that fact that we have to cover data by plots, and there are gazillion plots that people have, and how do we understand that? How can we sample better by having information beforehand to support stratifying, to reduce the cost that's needed? But maybe since you said pick one, I'll pick one related to climate resilient ag and climate change related work. As we know, one of the key challenges with understanding whether we were able to make farmers resilient to climate change is sort of measuring whether they were actually resilient, whether they were able to maintain or improve their well-being outcome. If you focus on the well-being side, which I think matters a lot because there is so many things that can happen between adoption and actual outcome. The challenge there is that did the climate event occur or not, or were you there at the right time or not? In the case of climate shocks, in the case of climate stressors, you're talking about low burn sort of heat increases and sort of converting land into worse climatic zone that they weren't beforehand. So both of them have challenges. One is related to the fact that you don't know if you're going to be able to measure at the time when the climate event occurs, or do you have long enough time series of observations for the long time stressors. And both of those are, I think, really important places where Earth observation could play a role. And I think that we need to do a little bit more work to really fully understand, is that possible at the level of granularity that we want? And related to that are a fair degree of climate resilient technologies that require sometimes complex adoption. Complex behaviors have to be adopted. To what degree can Earth observation really help us understand if those actually occurred? Because that's a pretty complex survey to understand that. And I know that AWD came up being able to measure whether that actually happened or not. And there is a fair amount of work going on and getting to the level of detail needed to understand how much fertilizer was applied, what is the soil health outcome that was achieved or not. Some of these pieces of adoption and the interim outcomes that we feel, or the intermediate outcomes that we feel, are going to make farmers more resilient. Can we get better at measuring that? And can we really get to a more complete assessment of resilience by deploying these cost-effective approaches to get a true time series on well-being outcomes for farmers with and without climate shocks and as the climate worsens? That would be my top pick.
Yeah, thanks. And I did bind your hands that way and make you pick, so I appreciate that. We've seen in a lot of the presentations so far that this kind of work at the intersection often involves multidisciplinary teams, some with remote sensing or environmental science or agronomic science backgrounds, collaborating with evaluators or social scientists. Multidisciplinary evaluations in themselves are not particularly new, but I feel like this is a different flavor of multidisciplinarity than maybe we've seen in the past. So let me ask you how you think this kind of multidisciplinarity reshapes some of the way that we are approaching impact evaluation, whether that's in terms of how we form the evaluation teams, or what organizations need to be involved, or the process of designing the evaluations themselves. And Arif, maybe let me start with you, and then Rothio, and then I'll come back to Tulikana too.
Thank you, Ariel. Yes, and as I noted in Zimbabwe, we kind of we as a client, we kind of did the marriage between IPA and NESA, and it's because each of them bring their own expertise. It is working, but with of course, it comes with a lot of challenge. Individual organizations have their own way of approach to the evaluation design, and also their priorities are different. So we are handling this in one way, but again, we do not believe that can be scaled up. We are trying it. In order to scale it up, probably the expertise have to be, I should not say have to be, but it would be much more convenient to have those expertise within one organization. That's what we think, but yeah, time will tell. Thank you.
Rothio?
Yes, thank you. So I think that interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity always adds a lot of value, but also adds complexity. And in this new scenario, we have a lot of needs in the world of Earth observation data and remote sensing. We have a lot of needs on some people that understands the technical part very well. And I think those experts are fundamental for the table, but even more important is that everyone has a common language and that everyone can really understand each other very well. So all the organizations should work in building their capacity to have people that are not only a great expert in the subject area, but also is a person who has been exposed before to all these different type of experts and has an open mind and the awareness on how to translate the technical stuff or circulate ideas among in non-specific discipline table, if that makes sense. And that happens a lot, even within our organization as well, because we have a lot of we have a lot of people from different fields as well, and it is challenging.
Oh, I think I'm next, right, Ariel, according to you. Those are really great observations. I think this piece about building the right teams is super important. So the Earth observation scientists, and then I think there is this individual who really understands the Earth observation, and the other side of it is super important, the translatability of that information. And Anthony does that with great effect here at Mathematica, and I think that's really valuable to understand the details. I wanted to give a little bit of a different spin on the question you had about how does multidisciplinarity reshape some of the ways we approach impact evaluation, by sort of saying, what do we look at from the impact evaluations themselves? I mentioned the idea of climate stressors, and being able to sort of direct our attention of how can impact evaluations look at the long run impacts. Can we make sure that we're not evaluating for short-term outcomes and sort of planning for understanding whether we are preventing maladaptive outcomes? Are we looking at additional outcomes which really round out the overall development objectives beyond agriculture itself? What are the co-benefits? Are we making sure we are also tracking the mitigation impacts of adaptation interventions, and certainly things that are within, say, the rice cultivation gamut has both effects, or irrigation for that matter, if that leads to rice cultivation. So I basically, I think it really makes you look at your evaluation area from the Earth's perspective. You're looking at areas as a landscape that's connected through natural resources, and what influence does that have in us trying to understand whether our interventions are really looking at these additional outcomes and understanding the full impact of our work. So I did want to say that that sort of lens that it brings overall has been really, at least for me, very insightful. Hannah, over to you.
And then I was going to originally be saying, I don't think we really know yet how it reshapes IEs for us. And I think there's more experience we're going to need to have to really know. But I do really just want to echo the conversation about translation. I think there's an understanding that, we're going to be bringing as much as possible, like our ground data, but also our ground experience with each individual program, the understanding of the context that is necessary for a good impact evaluation. But how does that translation be, if we're adding more, discipline areas, more technical language, more people who need to kind of speak the same language? Who does that? Is, to what extent does Mercy Corps facilitate those types of, conversations and groups? I think that's still a really open question of, like, how does it really reshape the way we do things, or is it maybe an added layer?
Yeah, those are really great insights. So that's a little bit about the team formation. Let's talk about funding models. So how do you think the current funding models, both for impact evaluation, but also for Earth observation research and agricultural programming, how do you think they comport with this idea of integration across these facets? And what do you think needs to change about these models if we're going to make this integration more successful or productive? And I've totally lost track of my order, so maybe let's just go across my screen. Tulika and Rothio, or Arif and Hannah.
Thanks, Ariel. I think that this is a very important question. I think, in terms of the current funding models that exist, I think where there are opportunities to respond and there's that openness that, sort of the funding models provide, we're able to build in the idea of bringing in Earth observation data to provide that extra rigor or cost savings. But I think maybe Hannah made that point earlier. But as much as the entities issuing the work are able to sort of call on or sort of make an indication, it makes it easier and to allow for the multidisciplinary teams to participate in it, and recognizing the fact that we have talked a lot this morning about how Earth observation can be cost saving, but the reality is that for a bit it can be cost increasing, but worthwhile. So it's more like, what is the return to the investment that we are making? Are we able to look at more data, look across a wider geography, be able to bring data where data doesn't exist? So I think this is a really important conversation. I'm glad you're asking that question and being aware of the mechanisms by which we can do more of this work.
Yes, thank you. So I would speak on the side of the Earth observation research funding, which is the one that I know. I think the landscape is changing really fast. This is a really, really fast evolving sector right now. And I think what is interesting in relation to your side is that there are starting to be a lot of programs that offer, well, of course, data that is freely available because they're public data, but also data that has been traditionally private at very, very pricey, and now the prices are coming down. And we are developing like new models for of pricing in a way that researchers on the first place, and this is my area where I work, can access that data at a lower cost. So for instance, at Planet now, there are several programs that are completely free. One is the basic science users that can sign up for free any part of the globe. We have 200 countries, I think. And there is another program for any researcher or reporter or activist that work in any tropical area in the world with deforestation. They get the data for free as well. And I think this is hopefully something that continues and also grows and allows a lot of different agencies working in impact evaluation and also in other important development issues to try to make trial studies and pilot studies with a smaller amount of data to see whether it's actually interesting or not for you to invest in remote sensing for larger projects, because I think it's really important to have a first pilot from your side before committing to nothing bigger. And I pass it to, I do not remember the order, sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks, Orgio.
Sorry.
In our case, there are a handful of studies which only incorporate Earth observation. Based on our experience, we think that it has to be incorporated in the main scopes of work, because right now we have a scope of work for the socio-economic evaluation, then we have a separate scope of work for using Earth observation, and then we try to combine them. It has to be written into one scope of work. That's one. And then we primarily, again, I can only speak for the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. We have primarily three mechanisms of funding. One is we directly procure evaluation. Another one is when our partners submit an application, they can build in an evaluation in their proposal. And then third is for humanitarian assistance, primarily in the emergency context. We have a cooperative agreement where they pre-solicit and they have a pre-solicit evaluation so that the researcher is ready, and then they match with the implementer. Again, because of the so few of these evaluations incorporated Earth observation, I don't think that we are still in a position to make a comment about what would be the best possible way forward. Definitely our partners would be able to tell us, how it works best for them. But definitely it should be written into one scope.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think for us, at least, it's probably connected to a bigger question of just how we fund monitoring and evaluation in programs in general. This sort of work would likely get, bucketed under the general M&E budget within any particular program. But, many of you may have experienced in times when folks are trying to cut budgets or, they're aligning it to certain requirements for the donor. M&E is often one of the things that gets put on the chopping block very quickly. And that's something that we've been pushing back against. I think it seems very clear that, donors like BHA are changing on that too, and very much like supporting robust M&E budgets in programs. So I think it's in some ways both internal work and work along with the donors to make sure that any monitoring and evaluation budget not only includes this type of work, but like we're being very intentional about ensuring all of the particular costs are accounted for and then not cut as things get tough. So back to you, Ariel.
Yeah, thanks. Those are really interesting insights. Thanks for that. So the point of all of this, of course, is programmatic learning. So how do we know how to do the actual work of improving the planet and helping people to do that better? And that's a challenge for every impact evaluation, even ones that have, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. But I'm trying to think about whether integrating Earth observations into impact evaluations makes this challenge harder or easier. We saw earlier today some really great examples where government's own ministries are really excited about results from impact evaluations, like the Ministry of Environment in Niger, looking to scale up the use of demi-lunes, for example, right? And these kind of other techniques as well. And so, sometimes I think maybe seeing a picture, like an image, can speak 1,000 regression tables. So I'm trying to think about whether this is harder or easier, and what the implications of this kind of learning might be from this integration. So Tulika, maybe again, we'll start with you, and then Rothio, Arif, and Hannah.
Ariel, that's an interesting question, and I would say that I'm struggling to think of why it'll become harder. And I'm curious to see what others have to say about it. I think, as I mentioned earlier, and the questions and the remarks that we have had earlier from the panel, the presentations that I made earlier, it just allows you to learn more, to reduce costs, and really get information on a wider scale for more time, for a longer time series. The part that may be harder only might be in how do we use that data and use it in a way that we fully understand what the information coming in is, how can we use it, and what's the concerns around it. I mean, the bigger challenges would be around essentially, can we really get the information at the scale that we want? Can we really measure changes over time, like 1 year after the other? We'd all know that all those things are a little bit harder right now. But overall, to the degree that we can use it, I think particularly for agriculture evaluations, there's just a lot of benefits. So I'm curious to see if people have other perspective, and hopefully we get a chance to reflect on that.
Well, oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Okay, so, like it was great to see so many presentations today from Niger. BHA has been funding WFP since 2014 in Niger to improve the agricultural productivity, basically promoting these climate adaptation techniques with, Half Moon and Zai. And we designed an impact evaluation with our NASA colleagues using primarily geospatial to measure the impact as well as resilience of the production system. And based on the evaluation finding, we found out that the pre-post difference between pre and post, the NDVI values increased by 50%. And the difference between control and treatment, the NDVI values increased by 25%. So that's wow, right? It really helped. You demonstrated that there's a significant improvement in greenness. But what does that mean to the poor farmer who are benefiting from this increased productivity, right? What does that mean to the people that we wanted the benefit goes to? So we then had to, we used a qualitative study. We went there and we went to 14 of those villages. We talked to people to understand what does that mean to them. What happened to their life as a result of the increased greenness, and what this greenness is. Is it trees? Is it grass? Is it crop? Or these are wheat? What those are? So and of course we found great results. But what I wanted to point out that I think it always has to be incorporated with ground data. So Earth observation without the ground data may not be meaningful in many cases. So I would say that whenever we are designing, if the benefit is going to a household level benefit, then we definitely need to have ground data to make sure that that we can interpret the information in a way that we want to. Over.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that obviously, well, I'm in the side of the satellite data provider, so of course I'm gonna say it's great. It's a great tool and it's super beneficial. But on my side, well, I want to start with the positives. I think that I'm going to reiterate the point I made before. I think that being able to compare different regions is a big positive. Before working at Planet, I work in a National Science Foundation project with many communities facing climate change. And we wanted to implement methodologies that were very similar because we wanted to be able to compare results. And one of them was remote sensing based methodologies. And I think that's a big win that we can use it across the world and have that overview that it's very hard to have with other methodologies. And of course, the scale of data collection at the cost of this is just very, very appealing. But I fully agree with Arif. I think that it's important when designing the whole evaluation to make the question, why do you want to use remote sensing data? This is a question I make to my own universities and customers. What are you trying to solve here? Is something that you can measure with remote sensing data? And sometimes it's not. When you're working with resilience, there are always going to be the dimensions that are qualitative dimensions. You need to be on the ground. And sometimes the answer is yes, but is a yes and is limited because maybe it's yes, but only if certain conditions meet. So I think it's critical to make the right questions in the right moment, and the right moment is always at the beginning. Or if you do them at the end, at least hopefully it helps for the next cycle or the next exercise to understand better. And sometimes I think remote sensing data can be underutilized. And it's also important to know for the diversity of cases that we can use a given set of data. And for that, it's important to be exposed to many use cases and to talk to the community. And I pass it to Hannah.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think since my perspective is coming from the MEL side, I think it's more drawing from me on general struggles that we have in synthesizing learnings from impact evaluations and even from cross-program results that we're seeing. I think introducing Earth observation can make things easier. I think it certainly can be a source of, as Ariel's saying, evidence that is just really impactful for people. It hits them, it's visual to the eyes, and it's perceived as objective, I think, in a way that some other sources may not be, even though we know it's not so simple as it being objective. But nevertheless, there's that sort of perception that you're working from objective evidence there. So I think that could be a way where things become a little bit easier, or learning from IEs becomes a little bit easier. But I do think that it could become harder in some ways too. One way it could be if Earth observation And impact evaluations with Earth observation really becomes a tool that only certain kinds of organizations can use, whether it's for cost reasons or expertise reasons or whatever it might be. And that could end up leaving out large parts of the actual practice of agricultural development programming, and it could bias our knowledge, and it could be a small group of organizations talking to each other, in terms of trying to learn how to do these, how to make these changes. And then another way that it might be harder is if it kind of it just is perceived as just one more thing on top of a pile of evidence that we're struggling to already holistically synthesize. So we're already struggling to, we're pressed for time, we're working in environments where we know that there are data quality challenges. And if the introduction of EO is perceived as introducing even more uncertainty, even more gaps, even more people kind of telling you like, well, just interpret this evidence with caution and we know it can't account for X, Y, Z. It may actually become kind of just even more hard to pull out the programmatic learning that is impactful because the sort of the ecosystem of it interacting with all the other parts of the evidence just isn't clear. So I think that's one way it could become harder. I'm not saying it necessarily would. It's just something that I see, because realistically we're tending to face systematic gaps that hinder our learning, just that are based in our lack of cross-organizational information sharing or our lack of continuity and expertise and short time frames before programs close down. And so EO can't solve those, but it has to find a way to be able to work within them in order to actually make the learning work. So back to you, Ariel.
Yeah, thanks. That echoes definitely a lot of some of the things that were on my mind as kind of Tulige, you were thinking about how it might make it harder. And I was thinking, man, this is another thing that people might worry is not done exactly right, or some other way to take some pot shots.
If I may though, I mean, just to reflect on what folks said, I think it just depends on what assumptions you make about when EO is integrated. And I think just word for us in the community that, and I think Rocio, you also mentioned this, is that we should use it in the context where it can provide more certainty rather than add to it. So I think this whole initial piece of being able to interface with the right people to understand, is it applicable in your context? Can you really get within programmatic learning or not? Is it really going to move that fast? I think if we do it with that care and responsibility, then it would add value, but we have to make sure that we're not just adding it because we can and because it's nice and because it'll create a nice picture. But I think if we do it with that, then I think we should be able to make life easier.
Yeah, and I want to just add something based on a comment that Richard had in the chat. That's not so much a question, but just want to make sure we think about it is, something he's particularly interested in, something we've talked a lot about, is using this Earth observation to give information back to farmers and community members. He was referencing work that he did in Nepal using fixed wing videography and showing those images back to communities that I think were pretty eye-opening. And just, I think for all of us, kind of related to the comment Hannah made about the challenge, if this is really going to be a high cost, kind of high barriers to entry thing, that it could make farmers and community members even further from the kind of evaluation and learning chain than they already are, and kind of create more distance there. Maybe I think we have time for just one more question from me, and then I'll just make sure everyone, please do pop questions into the chat for the panelists as well. But Rocio, maybe I'll just start with you for this bit. What new developments in Earth observation are still in the nascent or kind of basic science stage that we can hope to harness and integrate into impact evaluations, not tomorrow or next year even, but like medium term? And then maybe I'll turn to everyone else and think about how might we prepare for these? And also, when might we say that there's enough evidence or enough of an evidence base around them that we're kind of ready to try to scale them up beyond that basic science or pilot scale? So Rocio, what should we be excited about?
Thank you so much for this question. Yes, we are so excited right now about many things that are coming up this year actually and next year. I would say that there are 4 major things that are coming within Earth observation. One of them will come from any provider, public or private. The other 3 I'm gonna speak today are from Planet. The first one that will come from everywhere is the revolution with AI. AI has been with us for decades, but in the last year, we are having developments that we haven't seen before. And the speed of it is speed of light, really. We are, even we are trying just to catch up. And this is gonna change the way we do things, especially with the new capabilities of deep learning and convolutional neural networks. The ability of processing data and analyzing data is gonna skyrocket. So that is one. The other 3 that come from Planet. The first one I am really very excited is analytics. We are going to provide something called planetary variables, which is not just providing the raw data, but providing the analytical data that you can work with. And we're going to start with a few of them. One is soil water content. The other is biomass proxy. The other is land surface temperature, and there are a few others. These have been tested for years, and they're going to be ready to utilize. The way in which we are going to be able to offer this to different communities, we're still discussing, but I think it's going to be really helpful for groups and communities that might not have the technical capability to maybe make this analytics by themselves, but can apply them directly. And then the other 2, one is the hyperspectral satellites that we're launching this year. They're going to come with 400 spectral bands. And we are also launching a higher resolution satellite with 30 centimeter resolution and a higher revisit timing. I think that the way in which maybe everyone can sort of prepare for these things is, I think it's a great moment to start to build capacity within your teams. And building capacity comes in different ways, but one important difference between before and now is that before maybe you could have 1 GIS person in the team, that was fine. But now I'm noticing that a lot of my partners and people I work with are struggling a little bit if they don't have a person who is literate in Python and coding. This is like the new entry to geospatial data. And everyone who has an interest in using EO at a scale, they need to build capacity in that. And there are a lot of people that have those skills. The newer generation are, very well equipped. Not necessarily your generation, also all kind of generations. But what I mean is that the capacity is there, but it's important to capture that and have that in place before committing to these technologies. The other capacity is in terms of infrastructure. As these technologies come, we also need to be able to have better storage, better computing services, maybe think which kind of cloud computing we will use. Maybe allocating some budget for that, maybe even creating budget lines for those. And the other thing that I think could be very helpful is to stay in touch and in contact with the developers. In this case, I'm super happy to be here today. We've been talking also, I'm privileged that we have a relationship and we talk to each other, but it's great if you all have a relationship with people that are working actively on this, so you can get a sense on how these things are coming along. And the last thing I will say is that for any new type of data, no matter how much evidence is outside in terms of papers and publications and white papers, I think the most important piece of evidence for you is to have a good pilot case. So if you can get a small sample of any new technology or data and apply by yourself in a small case, I think that is much more useful than having said, 100 papers published, because you're going to know whether that is actually something your organization wants to invest in or not, maybe not. And I pass it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rosio. That's a lot to be excited about. Yeah, looking forward to a lot of that. Wow.
Thank you.
Guys, any thoughts about how to prepare for any of that, Tulia?
Yeah, no, that's super exciting. I mean, there are a few things, right? Few unanswered things from our side on how to use Earth observation. Esteban put one of those challenges in. For example, for all the advances we've made, we are really able to get to yields only for very specific crops. We have difficulty in identifying yields when there is intercropping. So I'm wondering if this high spectral bands and the higher resolution can resolve that. So it's the eagerness to get to additional outcomes that will be of interest. And I was also very curious about the idea of using really high resolution images, which I imagine would be costly, as a substitute for in-field ground truth data. And this is something that many in the Mathematica community are thinking about. And so that seems, if you can get to that'll be really, really exciting. And of course, improving the access is certainly very helpful. So great if you can sort of give some ideas on whether that's feasible with some of these new products or not, but that would be very helpful.
Sure. Should I respond now or Ariel? Oh, yeah, great. Thank you. So for hyperspectral Tulika, we're going to launch the 2 satellites this year. And after launching, we're going to start to have some first data and start to analyze the applicability of that data. So this is very new. I expect some evidence coming out by 2024. And if anyone is very interested, I recommend to talk to the people at Planet that work with hyperspectral, because they are partnering with some organizations as in a capacity of testers. So there is nothing yet in place. So, and I'm not part of that team, but I know that they would be interested in having people saying, okay, we want to utilize this for this. Is it feasible? So we will start to work on that in 2024. And I think that it would be interesting for some of you to maybe explore if you could partner. And then for the higher resolution, we have already a high resolution satellite, which is SkySat, which provides data 50 centimeters that I think it has been underutilized by many institutions because of the price. And because of that, this year we included the archive of this 50 centimeter resolution data for universities who wanted to have the campus license, which is a research license that we offer. I don't know, and I would hope that they will start to offer this archive of high resolution data to other organizations, because I think that is very useful for you to evaluate whether higher resolution data has capability to substitute ground data in some cases, or not substitute, but maybe accompany ground data. That is exactly how some private companies or governments are using this high resolution data. Actually, I just attended a talk from a county government yesterday where they are using fine resolution data to monitor farms that before they have to visit in person. And it was they just have like 3 people in the team. They couldn't do it, so they are using this high resolution data. I think that buying the new high resolution data it's going to be quite an investment, I would imagine, for many organizations. But getting perhaps a sample of archive data or a sample of tasking data, which is the data that you can order beforehand, it's a useful way, and then applying to a very specific case and see whether you get the results that you want.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rosio. All right, well, looks like we have reached our time, and lots of good comments in the chat, so feel free to read those. let me just let us take a brief break here before we just conclude with our community of practice breakouts and concluding remarks. Before we do that, let me just say again, a great, really deep thanks to Tulika, Rothio, Arif, and Hannah for the really insightful comments and sharing your expertise with us. I learned a lot just from kind of hearing the diversity of views and also the points of agreement. All right, we'll return just top of the hour here for some really exciting and fun breakouts. So see you all in just a few minutes.